Okay. Right, so we saw that was the union of the Shema Ha'atzmi and the Shema HaChodesh. And so since the Shema HaChodesh is Nimshach al Manas, since it was Nimshach al Manas Lifel, it's a bittul in Olam HaAtzilas, and therefore it's Nimshach that it was already Nimshach of a Mishkale al Manas Lokachat Ezim, you might say, to take Ezeshu Tafkid in the whole Seder of the Gilei Elakus Lamata, and Sof Atzilas is the Memutza in order to get to Olam Mizbeach. So if the Inyan of Shema, Hamshochas Shema is Lifel, Ezeshu Bitl, Ezeshu Iskalas, in Olam HaAtzilas, then Inyone is already to be poil. In other words, it's already Nimshach Lifel Bitl in something, not that it's Bitl Atzmi Mamish, Beliko Kilo, Beliko Toitol, Beliko Bit Inya. That's the difference between Shema Ha'atzmi and Shema HaChodesh. So he said, and so therefore, that's the difference, and therefore the Iskalas of the Shema, Ha'orasma, in Yonei, is to be poiled the Inyan of Iskalas in the Oiros of Atzilas. We'll see that in order to be poiled the Iskalas of the Kalim and Atzilas, we're going to have the Etzem Shema itself will come into action. And that's a very fascinating Inyan. That's something which is not really in Yonei Lifel is a bittel in the end that comes into action and does poil some sort of bittel. That's a fascinating Inyan, but we'll see about that as we go along. However, suffice it to say that the Shema HaChodesh, which for our purposes here is the Kav, in Yonei is that it's got in itself a roshim of that whole Inyan, how it was Mamish B'Shosho Atzmi. Therefore, it's Nimshach in such a way that it's Bechinas Dugmas Atik, and therefore that Bechinas of the Shema, that causes Baha'oilas Tatzilas Liyos Bahem Ahiskalalas, and that's a beginning of the whole Inyan we're going to now meet, but again to Toyu and Tikka. V'chein hu Inyan Reishis Iskalas Shema Hayetzim Mitzcha Da'ach Shuhu Latzis Iskalalas Hasfiras. In other words, it's the same Inyan. It's basically the same concept that Mitzcha Da'ach is only a mocker for the Gilui of the Shema from the Etzem Shema. And therefore it's Nimshach mi Mitzcha. And the Inyan of a Meitzach is well known as a Dover Chitzoni. And Alidei, the what you might call the Kvitz or the Bekia, derech the Meitzach, then the Shema, Ha'or Shema, comes into its Gilui. So therefore the fact that we say that that is Galus of the Ha'or of Shema from the Etzem Shema goes through the Meitzach of Acha, that fits perfectly. Because the Inyan of Amshocha, a Meitzach, is what we call a Bekia through a certain Helem. And that Meitzach of Ach is like the finality of us, like Neitzach, Heid Yisayid, V'oid, Philum Alphastach, and the Shema is Bokea derech zeh, and it's able to enter into Olam Tzila. Therefore he says that the beginning of the Izgalas of Shema, in other words, that Amshoch of the Ha'ora from Ma'atzmi is through Mitzcha Da'ak. Ve'ilu the Shema Ha'atzmi is the, how do you call it, the Dugmas Ha'atik, Bereisha Gilgelta Da'ak. Ve'ilu that Shema Ha'atzmi. The Shema Ha'or is only Nimshach through the Inyan of Meitzach. However, its Inyan is to be pearled the Iskalas. Shezeu Ike Inyan HaTikun Liyos Iskalas HaFochim Alidei Shema. So now we see every word takes us a step further. Here we see now the word HaFochim. Up to now we're just saying Iskalas HaSfiras. So now the Rebbe says even Iskalas HaFochim. In other words, that there's an Inyan in the Bittel, as you might call it, in this Gila, the Bittel Atzmi of Shema, and the Rishim of the Yer Bligvo, and the whole Arichas that Shema carries in itself, even after it's prepared the Meitach, that's able to be koilo the inyan of a fochim. Because there's two types of iskalos, there's a iskalos which is koilo protim, and koilo in itself a ribui protim, and then there's a iskalos which is koilo hafochim. So in order to be koilo in itself a ribui protim, you don't necessarily have to be bligvul. What you have to be is in an oven for Nakuda. You have to be like a leftover from a tzimtzum, a chokhmah me'ayin timotei. A chokhmah comes from the whole shleimus of Kesa in an oven for yesh me'ayin. And really yesh ba ribuy inyonim, but they're all in the form of a Nakuda. And that's Nakuda's koilin itself ribuy pratim. And the inyan is to be mefaneach the Nakuda, to bring out from the Nakuda all the inyonim. And that's the cloud, the inyan of Chokhmah Datzilas, however it's a spirit in Atzilas. But the inyan of his colors are fochim, well, that's a gilui of the ligvul, that's a gilui of the ein, so mamish, well, that's able to be koil inyanim which are mamish, hafochim. And that's the difference between what we saw here with the pardas or the Pel Hariman, said that there's a oyer which is nishmosa, or the inyan for nishmosa, the oyer in the kelim that's got different madregas in it, different oifanim, that the oyer could even be oyer a koil harbi protim, like in the inyan of Chokhmah. Of a to be mahapish, that it called to be koil mamish hafochim, well, that has to be a koil shel mailam here. And that's what he said, that that's like a ve'atzilas adov mechudash. That's kilo hanaya in oyer chatzil. The derech, the road and the way of Atzilus was going to bring about a whole new inyan, and kilo, as you might say, that didn't have to be. So I am haraya that in two, it wasn't like that. We're going to see now a whole huge essay when we get to the inyan from two, how it was in two, and the whole inyan and kavana saboira, and the whole inyan and the shleimus kavana and the gilu shleimusa, the koila, and the whole inyan occurs now in this inyan called tikkun. And in order to do that, we bring in a fourth, which is lamaila, from the etzem spheres and the yoris and the kelim gam yachad, and that's called ma. So in that Kufa 2 inyan, there's the Ha'oras Ma, which has in itself its whole gilui from its original shayrish. It's got that power in it, but it comes through the Meitzah Chavach, and therefore it's only like a Ha'ora. And then we're going to even come into a further play later for the Etzem Shem Ma boy of Masuyam. He's going to be Mizgala in Tikkun, and then he'll be Mizgala, how do you call it? How do you call it? The Kaviyachol Be'atzman, to use the old literature expression. The Eivish himself, Mamish, keep sure there will be Mizgal in Olam HaTzil. So that's basically the picture. And that was a little bit that this Gilui of Ma, Obir Bentayim, Ha'ora, with the Rishim of the Atzmi in it, or he begins a whole new task of his Kalal Sa'afochim. A new inyan altogether, his Kalal Sa'afochim. And that wasn't in the previous Eilamas. That's only in this Eilam it begins. And that's what we're now going to see, the whole difference between Tikkun and Toihu. So just Bekitza v'yakti minyan Shem Ma, shu la'aseh is kalal tza'afochim. You see, that's what he said at the beginning, that's what he says at the end. V'sehu milgo, well, that's the pnimiyas, ihu Shem Ma, b'chinas hakav, that's the kav, the ihu oire chatzil, b'chinas tzina hagodeh, הנמשך מהר אין סייף, וצנרס הפרוטים, הן מקוירי הוירס הפרוטים הוירסו, דן הקודש, שהן הספירה שבוי הן בלי מה, ובוי רושם ואינטו. We ask a kasha l'chora, it's mavua, b'makayim s'acherim, that the kav is just a whole series of nakudas. L'chora nakudas are already not that whole inyan of a kloli v'atmi, which in his last is his colors. So therefore he says it's not a stiller because the way they are in those spheres they are in the kavan. Those nakudas are in an even from bli ma legamre. They're not in an even for anything specific. Or boy reshim hoain. So even because they're in an even from bli ma, that they're even higher than the bittul of ma, therefore they're able to be literally a carrier of that reshim of the ein seif. V'al kain oisa is kalos batzilah. Therefore it's able to be poiled these scholars in Atzil. But that's a further beer what ain't kind of machim lahari b'zeh. But like I said, Oh, that's this concept of the Nakudas are they are in the Kav. That's a very fascinating Indian, because Lafisa Kundas are the different Madrigas in Nakudas, different Ifanim in Nakudas, and Einachanami, we have to say that there may be even 3 Madrigas in the Etzem concept of a Nakuda, maybe even more. So the way the Nakudas are in the Kav, this Indian from Blima, but it is Deira Shabir. But since it's not really our Indian right here, it's only just to be Mesa that Kasha, that the Kav, shouldn't be Cholila, Indian and Proteus. Therefore, he mentioned that Derech Agav, but it's really Deira Shabir. And therefore, the Kav, since it has this regime of the Ein Seif, and it's a Klolius, it's a Oirech Atzilas, it makes his colors of a pardes, Shezehu Oir Shebekelim. So the Rebbe said to V'teicha, it was difficult to learn that was the final maskana, the pardes, Yesharei Heim Oiris Protium, V'oirech Mashma Echot, Kemoi Chad Orche, we brought the Lashon of the Tanya, or the quotation from the Idur Rabba by the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, at the Chad Orcha, the Ish Bay or the Kolil Bay, the Tariag Orchim. Kam Yehein, says the Rebbe, Ab Sag Ma Uban, Ushem Ma, Uknis Nishoma Len, Nishoma. So he says that the Kalim, the Urs are Protim, are in the Kalim, they're different Shemways. Here there's Ab and there's Sag and there's Ma and there's Ban. But we have to say that also means ha'oras Mesiyomas of those shemas. And it's well known that they cause the amshocha, the oras into the kelim. Ma'ashenkin the Shem Mara, we mean here, who bechinas nishoma linishoma bechinas atik. In other words, at the Shem Mara, how it's shot, for example, to Zoh, we have to say that to the further ha'ora, how it's more shot to the etzem islapshus in the spirit. Of the Shem Mara, it's a ha'ora. From the Gilgul to the Ark and so on, but that's shot to the Indian and his colors. And that's the beginning of Atik, for who in the Kedugma, de la Eila, me Acher, that's the Dugmas Atik, which was La Maila Miach, Rashis Akar. So, Ko Indian Shema, the Tikkun, Shuhu Indian Ais Kalalas. In other words, Shema, the Tikkun, is this Indian. The Shema, more Protestant Madrega, that's the Indian of the Gilead, the Oiras, in the Kelim Ma. Va'inenu, Tehina Yadua, the Toyo Vatikun, Ein Bechinas Ma Uba. So once again, when we use these 2 expressions now, Ma Uban, we don't use them in the absolutely Protistic we just saw here, that the Protistic Shemas, what their Inan is to be Mamshik the Earth into the Kelim. We mean here, Ma Uban, even Hakloli, which is more in Ha Bidrushim, and Kutitera become a Maimorim, and after that, all the Maimorim and the Rabbeim, that there's 2 general Ifanim in Gilei Elokuz, Ma Uban. In other words, that Ma is the Indian of Beetle to Ein Seif, and Ma is killed the Oirois, what in Yonim is Gilui HaMoea, and therefore Beetle is colorless in the Moea, and then Ban in Yonim is in from a Matthias Ban, Gematria Behemo. The whole Indian from Ban is the Kuyach, to be Yer at Lamata, and to be Nimshuk by even Shomatzias. And that's the close the Indian from Das, Cholas Akelim, how they are, Betchitzenis Akelim and Atilas, and later the Indian from the Keren, the Biyah, but they're the Indian from Ban. So we see that it's put down in the Hemshechim, that those 2 Inyonim are Mirashis, how they call it, Kol HaGiluim Ad Sofkala Madregas. So that's 2 Inyonim Klolium. We're not talking about Proti, Hashemus Ma'alban, but the 2 Inyonim Klolium, and like we're talking about the Shema, is Oir Kol HaTzilut. And that's what we mean here. Ban, we mean Oir, what you might say, Kol HaKelim, Oir Kol HaYerida, Yelis, Bechinas, Helem B'Matzias. Dimi Yesh, the Tuyu, Ein Esses Spiras Daban, that they are the Esses Spiras of Shemban, Ucher Ein of Tachis HaKedusha, V'lochein Nikroin Malchin the Tuyu. I'm sorry, not Imi Yesh, no Esses Spiras, the Esses Spiras, the Tuyu, I said him yes. The Esses Firas the Toyo ein Esses Firas the Ban. Malachin Nikoi Malchin the Toyo. Since the Esses Firas of Toyo Amitzad Ban, and here's an interesting Indian, that Ban in this even is Davka higher in Gilui than Ma. Because Ma is Vike's Galus is an Atzilat. But Ilu Ban, he was saying, is the Indian from Toyo. And in other places we say that Ban is the Indian from Sak. Toyo is the Indian of Sak. Here we say that the Indian from Toyo is Davki Ban. So, because here we're going to talk about the what you might call the Indian of Toyo from Atzias, Sheb Toyo. That's the Indian we're going to place out Gosha. So therefore we say that the Indian of Sphira Sabatoyo is Ban. Because Ban is the Indian from Matzias. And we're going to see that it's got to do with the Indian from Malchus. And we're going to talk about how Malchus, the Indian from Amelech, Malchus, is taken from Matzias. Now, the other aspects that we may find in Malchus are not going to so much be under our observation here, even though they are the case, but the Indian of the taker of the pronunciation of his Matzias, which is a king. In other words, how do they say the famous story of Sikram the Rebbe Rashab, when he was a boy, and he was playing with the Razor and other members of the family and some other children and so on. They decided they're going to play Rebbe and Chosi. So they said to the Rebbe Rashab, no, you be the Yebbi. They were so small, they didn't say race properly. I said, you be the Yebbi. And he said, no, he refuses to play the Rebbe. He doesn't mind being a chassid, but he's not going to play the Rebbe. So they said to him, why? And he said, Yebbi is no Einom. He said, the Rebbe is only one. kind of two Rebbe. The Rebbe is no Einom. And then he said, we got the Rebbe, and my Tatas the Rebbe, he's the Rebbe, and he can't play Rebbe. Beautiful story. They put down in the Sikhs for further kind of, is a king. A king is only one. There's no two kings. That's the whole Sikh in the river. That ain't snake sorry, ain't snake malachim mishtamshe. And with David and Shlomo, that David pronounced Shlomo was going to be the king while he was still the king. And how come he can be mamlich another melech while he's still the melech? A whole big famous pilpul from the Rebbe, Ben Agel is there. Oh, big Sikha. Yeah, it's in the Lakut Sikha. I just don't remember which chelik, but it's there. I'll hop on him. Kunta said, Melech is taken from it. That's the way we're looking at the Indian Amalchus here. So that was the Rebbe, that's connected. The spheres of Toyu are connected with Ban, and therefore they're called kings. Because Ban is the Indian from Matthias. They're called Malchin to Toyu. Akamei Shekosu, Va'ila HaMalochim, Asher Malchu, Ve'eretz Edom, Lifnei Melech Melech L'Bnei Yisrael. The Malucha Hu Shem Ban, Kanoida. The Indian from Malucha is, as is one on, the Indian of Shem Ban, Hu Bechinas HaYeshes V'Hamatzi. We know other things about Malchus as well. But that's the Indian of Malchus, Papuyo Mamish. That is the Indian of Malchus. The co-Indian of Malucha, who is Hayesh, Vadova Ba'atzmei Daka. In other words, a king's got to be he's got to be taken from a tzir. And if not, he's not a king, he's got to be taken from a tzir. He's got to kill him, take away the matzias from all the others. They're not allowed to have any matzias negdoi, and then he's a king. Well, says the Rebbe, that's the amiti is Indian begolui of a malchus, of a malucha, and that's the Indian of Ban. Ban is the Indian Davki Yerida into Machi. The co-Indian of malucha, upkinas yesh v'dova ba'atz medava, ayesh v'shulehem, meaning the spheres into you, zeho is sibus hashpira. It was all because of this tweaking of their Matthias and their Yeses. Well, that's what brought about the Indian. That's what brought about the Indian Aspira. We're back to the same old Torah. Now somebody else will be around. זה היה סיבת השבירה, מפני שלא היה להם קישור וחיבור זה עם זה. In other words, המלך האמיתי, he doesn't have any קישור וחיבור עם Canaan. He might have sought him, and he might have others that they carry out his tasks, but he's not b'kishuv v'chibur itam. Because b'regah that he is, that to a certain extent they can have a part of the malucha in their pocket. Wherever he's a yebbi, is ainum, a king is one and only. These other people, their whole Indian is to be mashodas, retainer of the melech, not to be b'kishuv v'chibur itam. Rebbe, the amazing thing about the Rebbe, there was a very begolui by the Rebbe, very much so. Being as the Rebbe is Sfiras of Malchus begolui also, that, the Rebbe never had anybody that he was really sort of, had he called his ish Seder and he used to shmuz with him and talking over his inyonim and all that. It wasn't shy. And therefore the answers now what the Rebbe gave and gives of Pishkois and all sorts of inyonim, it was kyu chatuk, Immediately, it wasn't, leave that with me for a few days and I'll sort of come to a maskana, boom, They gave it this little book, I don't know, I got hold of it, this little fellow, what's his name, Gansberg, that he was mamish, Ben Bayes brother. I used to eat by the Rebbe on Shabbos, some of the Yom Tovim and everything. Used to eat, but he was there a couple of seders after the Rebbe already made the seder in the library with the Rebbe's. After he stopped going to the room upstairs. So he saw Dvorim, Abelishia. He used to sleep in the house. He used to sleep downstairs in the house, and the Rebbe's were upstairs. He used to have a little corner downstairs. He was a long time. He was like a sort of a shema, Beli Matthias inside the house. So he brings that once somebody came and they knocked on the Rebbe's door. So the Rebbe was not noyeg in the Shonim Achrim, particularly to open the door. No matter who knocked, the Rebbe didn't open the door. So that was one of his tough kiddim. The anybody said, no, he should peep out to see who they were, and he would do what he thought should be done. So he looks out and he sees it's a psachosh of a person, in the Chassidim. So he opened the door partially, and he said, who is? So he said there's some very serious matter that the wife of, I don't know, one of the really big people, in the hierarchy of 770, been taken suddenly to hospital or something. So, it's an urgent matter they want the Rebbe should know about it. So, okay, he said, all right, he'll do what he can. He can't promise anything. He'll do what he can. So he took the petting and he took it into the house, and he went up to check. He said the Rebbe used to have his own room, the Rebbe a lot of nights would sleep in that room, and stay the night in that room. So he thought maybe he might just still catch it. It was in the middle of the morning. It was middle of the early hours of the morning. So he went up and he saw the Rebbe, and then he heard a slight click in the bedroom or something, and he understood the Rebbe had already gone into the Cheder HaMitos, where the Rebbetzin was. So he understood that, what's he going to do? He's going to knock on the door, knock the Rebbe out. So what he did was he took the thing and he slipped it under the door. He slipped it under the door. So early in the morning, there was something, the Rebbe was already up, and the Rebbe was doing whatever he did before going to somebody else. So the Meiser was given the ganze Seder. So all of a sudden the Rebbe called him and woke him up. And the Rebbe said to him, listen here, this is the answer. The Rebbe said, give it over quickly because they need. So the Rebbe, in the bedroom, pulled the thing out of the door, looked it up, worked out what was the answer. I woke this guy up early in the morning and told him what to do. So there was never any hesitation, there was never any sort of, calling an advisor, slowly Hamalucha, they fit with the Torah, was took my dad right there. That's enough on a king. In other words, he doesn't have chibur v'kishur in other Matthias. He's a king. Erefa, says the Rebbe. And therefore he's in an oven von Einoi Kisher v'chibo zeh im zeh. Yeah, and that's the Inyan of the Sibus Shvira, how it is, the Shviras in Toiv. Now we have to say that that's also the Inyan of a king in Tikkun Derech Hagam. And we're going to have to answer, how is it then that the king in Tikkun has all these in your name of Ebersa Malucha, and Abu Pikein, he's Tafki the king, Al Pitora, which is the Inyan of Tikkun. Yeah? And that's another Inyan which will need a form of a biur. Al Chapani, V'zeh Maima HaMaima, the Sifra, that's Niusa. Well, that is a statement, but the Sifra that's Niusa is a separate work from the Zohar Kodesh. That's very Kadmoin. And it's Miyuchas, I think, I forget what the Sifra that's Niusa is Miyuchas too, but it's probably even earlier than the Zohar. It's a special short work with Gilei HaKabbalah from very early times. Sifra that's Niusa. Yeah, and the Talmud Arizal, one of the Talmud Arizal, he wrote a biur on the Sifra that's Niusa. That's often brought into it. So it's written, Da'ad loy hava mitkala, until there was not a mishkal, loy havu mashgichin apin be apin, that the spheres that they were in Olam HaToihu were not literally paying attention face to face. They were not literally taking care almost of one another face to face. Now, what's this Indian of loy hava mitkala? The word mitkala in Aramaic literally means mishkal. Mishkal, weighing something up. Mashma that the mitkala was like an answer to the whole thing, but until mitkala was mizgala, then they were not able to be mashgiach apin be apin. Now in Ayin Aleph, that's to say the Hemshech prior to this one, there's a very big arichas in the Hemshech of Shvuos. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure it's the Hemshech of Shvuos. Over there, what he brings, the whole Hemshech begins with this Maimon of the Sifra that's Niusa, and he talks over there about the Indian of Mitkala, the Indian of Mishkal. And so the Indian of Mishkal means that you size things up in a way zeh keneged zeh. In other words, an emes of Mishkal is like the idea of a midah and a carefully worked out plan. That's what a Mishkal means. That is a shikul hadas. It's the same basic idea that you sort of weigh things up carefully and you see one inyan keneged hasheni, but even shezei yigalelecha benegel hazeh. That's called mitkala. In the Sefer, he calls that mitkala. So over there, the Rebbe's mother, this whole arichas inyan of toyu and all from a different angle than here, and he talks about arichas about that mitkala, about the inyan of the mishkal. However, the Rebbe begins with it here, and he said until there was this inyan of interbalance, as we might call it, between the spheres, then they weren't able to pay attention or care literally one about the other in a way of pneumias, face to face. In other words, maybe they did care about one another slightly. There was a slight inyan of iskalulas, but not apin be, not face to face. Vainu, shahoyu zeh tachaseh, that they were one underneath the other, mipnei shaloi hoyo lahem kisha v'chibu ela. Tell you was takarayt. It's a bit cold. Right? Ela kol echad v'echad, b'bchinas yesh v'dova b'fnei atzmai ad shaloi hoyu soivlim zeh ezeh. In other words, that a certain shaykhis might have been. It's brought down that there was a certain very minimal form of iskalulas in Toihu. But it wasn't in our even for mashgichin. What mashgichin means, paying careful attention, paying, as it were, inspection one over the other, and careful balance, careful care in the balance. Know it then. If that's not the case, then what really is the case is that it could be the Pechitenius is a certain derecheret of a Yoter Mizeh Lo in Etzem Ha'inyan Lo Yisayvlim Zeh Ezeh. Therefore, if it comes to a, like what you might call a showdown, that it's either me or him, then I'm sorry, it's got to be me. can't be both of us. How's the old Western quip have it? This town is not big enough for it's not big enough for both of us, you know. And Mamela, loy hoya efshali is sfira ha'acheres, ki'im kasher nizbat lo asfira kodem. Now, not that I say he wouldn't possibly imagine that it could be something else, but once you've already given him, as it were, what do you call it, the power of speech, you've already given him the ability to express himself, and he's the one now that's taken over the stage. Then he says, well, here I am, and this is now my Indian, and forget about anybody else, you know. We're doing things away from Kozev. And therefore says the Rebbe Kim Kashen is Batla Hasfira. He's got to literally lose his whole Metzias in order to give rise to the possibility of another Metzias even appearing or in any way being able to express itself. Didn't give any place cloud to the Indian of Gevura. ואויד שלא היה יכול לסבול כלל את מידס הגבורה. ולכן, בהכרח שנשברה ונסתלקה מידס החסד בכדי שיהיה מידס הגבורה. Now here's an interesting one. וכן מידס הגבורה לגבי מידס התפארת. Similarly, מידס הגבורה לגבי מידס התפארת. Now, you might say, we couldn't Tiferes in Tohu, we're just saying that Tohu doesn't have the whole union, and it's colorless. And Tiferes is a Gilu, Alidei is colorless. And therefore, the beauty is that, like we said, there is this colorless to a certain extent. What you might call a one-time round. This colorless does exist in Tohu. But it's only a chitzonistic union. And therefore, there is a union for Tiferes in Tohu, but it's a teikiftik Tiferes, and it doesn't want to hear klal of anything else. And we might say that the Tiferes in Tohu, maybe had a extra koyak Indians there, in that it had in itself a, had he called a Indian miyuchad in Gilead Ein Sof, in order to get that minimal, this colorless, to bring about a Metzias of Tiferet. And if says the Rebbe, once there was a Indian of Tiferes, then other spheres had to be, other spheres had to lose their Metzias, and they had to be misbatel. And therefore, we all came nemo behem vayomos melech ploini, ve'achach vayim loik ploini. Mishum de b'shah shemolat zeh, lo yehoyo be'efshori sheyim loik hashayini. It's not shayim. Therefore, it had to be vayim loik, and then it had to be vayomos, and then a new one. Okay, ein malchus neigas bechaverto afilo kamole nima. What that's a statement like every malchus boy from Kloli. Love to keep him malachim datu. That's a lesson in Chazal. That a king doesn't, literally border on another king. Kamole nima. That's the whole question that we had there. Like every David Mitchell and the whole Ariches, the mishum inyan hayeshes. She say inyan amalucha. You can't have two in on him. And now the Rebbe is going to bring an amazing moshel. We'll have to pause here for this evening. The Rebbe is going to bring an amazing moshel from Anoshim Chashuvim. And he's going to say that Davkin Anoshim Chashivim and Bali Chashivas Amitis, that's mashman in the Lashon. Davkin they can't get on. Because they're unable to get on one with the other, and that's one of the inyonim by Yid and B'klal. Because every Yid is a chashiva, and he's a chelach l'kav mimal. He's got everything that goes with that. That was very, very difficult to be puyel amitis achtas by Yid. It's put down as for him. And amitis achtas, is a favus, and davki because Yidden are mufroshim. Davki mi'inyonei ha'olam, and there's never a certain tuika for the amitius agilu of Elokus. Each one takes it personally, as it were. It's very difficult. It's got a certain trace of gilu Elokus in it. It's very hard to get them together. Oh, it's brought down. We state Loshim Korvu Reit Fezima, as the pasuk in Tilim. Korvu Reit Fezima. Balei HaTaivas was left in the room. It's easy to make a oneness to because they got one aim to get at their time. Everybody will help the other one. Dem Messiah seine Megala seine New Haven in die in Ataiva. It's a fairly dikizah. And we're going to see that the Rebbe will say in the Maskona that Ulai by Anoshim Shutim Yoter, you do find the in the scholars, and he said that's Mitzad Shirchos. They deep inside here, but it's a bracha. There was a possibility of and therefore it's very difficult. Whole Inyan Ma'aktis is very, very difficult Inyan. And therefore the Rebbe always says, I was just sort of Achtis. And that was a great thing by Matan Torah, Kuram Ke'ishev and believe it. It's much been certain Sfarim that, that was one time, and since then it's been terribly hard to really get mamish to that word of power. It's a lot for colours. That's what we're holding right now, guys. When I think about it, that's the Indian. We're going now, and today's we've got to get rid of we've got to be Mavatal, this Tisha B'Av. We've got to be Mavatal. You can't keep it up. And if it has to be B'Alim Kozeh, we've got to find a way to emphasize the actors without giving in on our principles. But on the other hand, it's got to be, it's a terrible tricky business. When you read these words, it's klaptimus. You can just see it.
Especially in Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah.
Halterim Shel Malka.
Yeah?
Halterim Shel Malka is in Eretz Yisrael. It's very difficult.
That's pillar place. Auch von ihm, der Rebbe ist geben Teich mehr, dass einer muss achten. And look, what we can't do, the Rebbe has to do it. I mean, the Rebbe is a fota. The Kinder können, and it's really mitzat ma'alosam that they're not able to. There's certain miles in there. That's moneh miyem, and let's get going. The fota, let the fota take action.